Hello, grade 12s. Welcome to today's show. It's Economics with Ms. P, where in this lesson we will be focusing on the oligopoly market. We are still busy with the market structures, so we will be referring to the other markets that we have covered in the previous lesson. So let's get right into it. So before we continue looking at what an oligopoly market is all about, I just want to have a quick recap on these two markets because I will be referring to them as we go through today's lesson. So we learned about the monopoly and we also learned about the perfect market. So I'm going to select a different color pen. There we are. So now I want to look at the differences between the monopoly and a perfect market. So starting off with the demand curve for the monopoly. So there is a downward sloping demand curve with the marginal, which the marginal revenue curve lies below the demand curve. So that's the demand curve for a monopoly. And when we look at a perfect market, we've got a horizontal demand curve and marginal revenue curve, same as the demand curve. So they are both horizontal. That is under perfect conditions. And in terms of price, we know that in the monopoly, the businesses or the firms are the price setters or maker. And then in the perfect market, we have the price taker. So here in a monopoly, the business determines the price, and then in a perfect market, the businesses take the price based on the market, which is demand and supply. So we don't allow businesses to influence the pricing in perfect competition, but in a monopoly, we know that it is based on the firms or the businesses. In terms of the business or the number of businesses offering that particular service, we know that in a monopoly, you've got an individual business, which is the industry because they are the sole provider of that particular good or service, where here you have individual businesses and they add up to make the industry itself. So you're not dealing with just one individual business as you are with a monopoly. And also a point to note about consumers, consumer buys less if the selling price is high and vice versa. Okay, so if the price is high and then the consumer is going to buy less of the goods and services available at this market. And then also if looking at the perfect market, you see that the business can't choose its price, and if it sells at a different price, it loses out on the consumers. Okay, so they can't sell above the market price, and they always have to sell at the market price if they are wanting to maximize the profits, where else here consumer buys less if the selling price is high. Then moving on to the monopolist or the monopoly. So the monopolist produces a lower output at higher prices. In so doing, produces a sub-efficient or produces at sub-efficient quantities. If it does not produce at the minimum point of the LAC curve, and then over here there is a larger output and lower prices. So there's economically efficient quantities produced, whereas here you have the sub-efficient quantities that are produced, and then produces on the lowest point on the AC curve, and then over here at the LAC curve. And then the producer and consumer surpluses are smaller, and then over the side they are bigger. And then products differentiated, they sell a unique product and there are no close substitutes available, so therefore people are forced to buy from these businesses. And then here the product is homogeneous, it's identical, hence it forms part of a perfect competition, whereas here products are differentiated, so they're not the same. In a perfect market, the products are identical. And then the last point that we're going to look at, that over long term can make economic profit, and only normal profit in the long run. Okay, so because then they can make, because they are the only people that are offering that particular service, whereas over here you can have new businesses coming in into the market to offer the same identical product, but supply can be increased based on the fact that there can be more businesses allowed to come into the market space. Whereas in a monopoly, those businesses try to put barriers in order to block other businesses from coming into the market space, because they enjoy the fact that they are the sole providers of that particular good and service. So competition is almost discouraged, and they do capitalize on the fact that they are the only ones who offer that unique product. Whereas in a perfect competition market, you've got a number of competitors offering an identical product, but there is an option. So if one competitor decides to say, I'm going to sell above the market price, then the consumer has an option or a choice of approaching another supplier for the goods and services. Okay, so I thought it'd be really nice just to go back to that table and be able to distinguish between a monopoly and also a perfect market, because as I introduce or as I discuss the oligopolies in this lesson, I will be making reference to a monopoly or a perfect competition market. So I thought that would be quite useful to do before we get into this topic for the day. So we're looking at oligopolies. So perhaps let's start off by defining what an oligopoly is. So an oligopoly exists when a small number of large companies are able to influence the supply of a product or service to a market. So there is influence. So you've got a small number of large companies. So they are big companies, and therefore they will be able to have some influence on the price. So there is influence from the business in terms of the pricing policy or the price for the market. So it's not just based on supply and demand, which we call or refer to as the market forces, but companies can contribute towards the setting of the actual price in this particular market. So do be aware of that. If you're looking at an oligopoly, then those businesses will be able to influence the supply of a product or service to a market. By controlling the supply of the product or service on the market, oligopolies aim to keep its prices and profits high. Okay, so that's the intention. So the fact that there's a few number of these large businesses, they actually influence the supply and demand of the product or services, but also they can influence the price and the profits because they want to sell their product at a higher price, but also maximize on their profits. So we know that when we look at the petrol business or the oil business, we know that that is an example of what a oligopoly is going to be all about, because there you've got a small number of large companies that dominate that market space, and therefore they control the supply and demand of that product. In doing so, they also have the power to influence the price and the profits in that market. So be able to define what an oligopoly is all about, and then also do emphasize on the point that they do keep their prices high, and also they do ensure that they maximize on their profits. So some important points that we need to be aware of. Like I said earlier on, oil companies, I'm just going to pull my screen up, there we are. Oil companies are one of the best examples of an oligopoly, because we know that in the oil sector or industry, there is a small number of large companies that dominate that market space. So they do make quite a good example of what an oligopoly is going to look like. So oil companies are part of this market. A special type of this market form is a duology, other people quote it because we use dual for a combination of two things. So other people pronounce it differently, a geopoly or duopolies, depending on how you want to pronounce that. So this is an industry with only two producers of goods and services. So you have company A and company B, and those are the only two companies that will be able to provide that service. Taken from the word, when you have a dual system, that means that you've got two systems in place. And in this particular example, we are referring to two producers of a special type of a product, which is oil, because oil is also considered to be a unique product or a scarce resource. And therefore, if you are in a position where you are selling this product, you are in a good market because it's only dominated by a few producers. So this will be a special market where you've got two producers in an industry that supply a particular product. Okay, so let's move on. But just before we move on, let's just tie up all the loose ends in this lesson. Remember to be able to define what an oligopoly is. So they do ask that in the exam or in a multiple choice question. So it's nice to know what a definition of an oligopoly is, but it also to help you understand the market or the markets better if you know the different definitions. Also do mention that they do influence the supply of a product and or a service, and also they do influence the pricing and also the profits in the market. An oil company will be an example of what an oligopoly is, and then also you do find yourself in a situation where you've got two companies or producers that produce a particular item. All right, so let's learn more about this special type of a market. So we know that there is limited competition based on the fact that there is a small number of businesses, large businesses. You have to emphasize on that in this particular market. So that on its own does limit competition because you have a few businesses that offer this particular service or that sell this product. So that on its own could be considered as a barrier. You know, there must be a particular reason why there's only a few businesses offering this particular service. So you can, mention it as a barrier because you have only a few suppliers who manufacture the same product. So here you're dealing with the same product, but you just have a few suppliers that actually manufacture this product. So you are limited for choice because if there's only two producers that supply that product and they decide or they fix the prices in that market space. So you haven't got much of an option because if you're not buying from producer A, then you have to buy from producer B. So it's important to be aware that, there's only a few suppliers that actually manufacture products in this market and they sell the same product because oil is oil at the end of the day. If you arrive at a petrol station and you want to fill up some oil in your car because you're getting a signal that you need to add oil in your car or in your engine. If you stop at this petrol station or that petrol station, you will be able to get some oil. It would be a different brand, but it does the same thing or function. So just be aware of that. And products may be homogeneous or they could be differentiated. So they could be a product that they say it's advanced and it's only for fast cars, or this one it's for buses and trains. So they can be differentiated, but in most cases they do sell homogeneous products, which means the same product as I've mentioned earlier on. So just do be aware of that. Moving right along. So what we also need to be aware of that this market is characterized by mutual dependence. So here's an interesting concept. Where am I? Let me go up. There we are. So I'm looking for this mutual dependence. The decision of one company will influence and will be influenced by the decision of the other company. So when we talk of mutual dependence, it means that my actions will directly or indirectly influence your business decisions or the manner in which you conduct or offer a service. So also, if company B decides to make changes, those changes will actually influence the pricing strategy in my business, because we are the only two producers of that particular product. So just be aware that there is mutual dependence in this market, and because decisions in one company will influence and will be influenced by decisions of the other company as well. And then also, oligopolies can frequently change their prices in order to increase their market share. However, this can result in a price war. Okay, so they can decide to change their prices. Usually they will say, you know, maybe let's say we were approaching the festive season, people get excited, they want to travel. So in order to travel, then you will need certain products. So what most businesses do during the festive season, they will hike up their prices because they know that consumers have more disposable income. So some people have received a 13th check, so they're excited, they want to buy gifts for family and friends. They'll be traveling back to where they originally come from. So there's a lot of cash that goes into the economy. I'll call it an injection so that it does make sense to you, because of the increased spending that is happening in the market. So they can, during that particular time, when they realize that, you know, consumers have more disposable income, they can decide and say, you know what, let's hike up our prices so that we can maximize our profits. Because I said earlier on, they sometimes, you know, target to sell their products at high prices because they want to earn high profits. So they could find a season where there's a hype about around shopping and buying goods and services, and they will capitalize on that moment and hike up their prices so that they can earn high profits. Well, let's take a quick break and I will see you right after this.